we're going to dive into a pretty wild story today. The dramatic, six-decade journey of the Unification Church in England. It's a story that goes from a passionate new faith taking over the streets of London to a fractured global movement that's just trying to figure out its future.
Yeah, that name, it probably rings a bell, right? For a long time, it was all over the tabloids, associated with all kinds of controversy, those huge mass weddings, and of course, the constant accusations of being a cult. But that name, honestly, it barely even scratches the surface. The real story is so much more complicated.
And just look at this contrast. It's pretty stark, isn't it? The movement in the 1970s, with all its energy and visibility, is almost unrecognizable today. So what on earth happened? How do you get from that to this? Well, let's get into it.
All right, so let's rewind. Our story really kicks off in the late 1960s. It was a time of huge cultural change, and right in the middle of it all, a group of missionaries arrive in England. They're fired up, inspired by their Korean founder, Sun Myung-moon, and they've brought with them a totally radical new message.
So the first pioneers actually showed up in '65, but things really got going in 1967, when they set up their first official center in London. From there, it just exploded. They targeted young, idealistic students, and soon these communal centers were popping up all over the country. So you have to ask, what was the message? What was so compelling?
Well, it all came down to this one book, basically, The Divine Principle. Now, this wasn't just a set of beliefs. Think of it more like a complete re-engineering of the Bible and all of human history. For a generation asking some really big questions, this book seemed to have all the answers. And the core idea is pretty straightforward. Step 1. God had this perfect plan for everyone. Step 2. Adam and Eve messed it all up. So, Step 3. All of human history since then has just been God trying to fix that original mistake. And here's the kicker. Step 4. The belief that Sun Myung-moon and his wife were the true parents, sent to finally finish the job Jesus couldn't, and restore humanity through perfect, God-centered families.
As you can imagine, a message that powerful led to a huge boom in membership. But the more visible the church became, the more intense the public backlash grew. And this period, this storm of controversy, would define them in the public eye for decades.
Now check this out, because the timing here is fascinating. In 1982, after a long, nasty legal fight, the church actually gets official charitable status in the UK. You'd think that's a massive win, right? A stamp of official legitimacy. But here's the thing. It did almost nothing to change what people on the street thought about them. That train had already left the station.
Yeah, because while the courts were dealing with legal filings, the public was seeing this. Headlines were screaming about mind-bending Moonies, painting this picture of a dangerous foreign cult that was literally stealing the youth of Britain. The media narrative was aggressive, it was sensational, and boy was it effective.
And this really gets to the heart of the conflict. On one side, you had terrified families and anti-cult groups shouting about brainwashing and mind control. But on the other side, you had the members themselves saying, "No way, we chose this. We found a purpose here. We found a community." Two completely different realities, clashing head-on. And this is the stuff everyone remembers from that time, right? The huge mass weddings, the blessings, the fact that everyone lived together in these big communal houses, the constant fundraising on the streets, selling flowers or candles. And then there was the really dark side of it all. Families so desperate they were hiring so-called deprogrammers to essentially kidnap their own kids and pull them out of the movement.
So after years and years of being under siege, something had to give. The pressure was just relentless. They reached a point where they realized, we cannot survive like this. They had to change tactics. Big time. And the new strategy was a total 180. They basically got off the streets and moved into the conference halls. The whole era of in-your-face public recruitment was over. The new game was about building legitimacy from the inside out. And this chart shows that pivot perfectly. Look at all that energy poured into street evangelism in the 70s. By the 90s, it's gone. It's been completely redirected into hosting these respectable-looking interfaith conferences, trying to engage with professors, politicians, and other religious leaders.
Part of this big makeover also involved a rebranding. You start hearing the name Family Federation for World Peace and Unification a lot more. It was a conscious choice. It sounds way softer, right? It puts the focus on universal ideas like family and peace, things nobody can really argue with, and it cleverly downplays the more controversial stuff about their founder.
But just as they seemed to be finding a new way forward, their greatest test was still waiting for them. Because what happens to a movement that's been built entirely around one single charismatic person when that person is gone?
And then, it happened. In 2012, Sun Myung Moon died. For his followers, it was this monumental spiritual event. But in practical terms, it created a massive power vacuum at the very top, and that's when things really started to fracture.
And the unbelievable part is that the split happened right inside the True family itself. On one side, you have his wife, Hak Jahan, taking control of the official organization, the FFWPU, but then one of their sons, Hyun Jin Moon, basically creates a major rival faction. For a movement built entirely on the ideal of unity, this was just devastating.
And that global drama had a very real impact right there in England. You can see that the vast majority of members stayed loyal to the main organization led by Mrs. Moon. But a smaller group did break away to follow her son, and the conflict just left some people feeling completely disillusioned, which really strained relationships in what had always been such a tight-knit community.
So all of that brings us to today. The Unification Church in England now is, well, it's a shadow of its former self. It's much smaller, the original members are getting older, and it's become a lot more internally focused. It really is a movement in the middle of a profound transition, trying to make sense of its own past and figure out a very uncertain future.
So what does that future look like? Well, a few things seem pretty likely. It will probably continue to shrink and become more of a niche community. Its survival, honestly, is going to depend entirely on whether the kids and grandkids of the original members decide to stick around and take over. The internal divisions aren't going away anytime soon, and their focus will almost certainly remain on quiet, charitable projects, not the mass evangelism of the old days.
Which leaves us with this one final massive question. After 60 years of passion, controversy, and division, the story of the Unification Church is an incredible story of survival. But it poses a challenge that goes way beyond just this one group. Can any faith really survive the death of its founder, the full weight of its own history, and the deep fractures that come from within?